Welcome back to Truth Worth Living, where we seek to understand God's Word so we can live in God's will. I don't know if you listen to much talk radio, but one of the tried and true tricks to get people to call in is the ever debate. You know what I'm talking about? I guarantee you it's happening right now for Super Bowl week on Sports Talk Radio. Who's the best quarterback ever? Obviously, it's Mahomes. Or is it? But this is what they'll do. The host will say something like, this is the best ever, the biggest ever, the smartest ever, the greatest ever. All the ever talk is completely subjective. But for those who have an opinion, they typically hold it with great conviction and will argue with anyone who dares to differ with them. Now, you might be wondering why I'm talking about that. Well, I thought about it this week when I came across a quote by John MacArthur regarding the last disciple that we're going to study. Listen what he said about Judas Iscariot. He is the most colossal failure in all of human history. Okay, really? Is that true? The biggest failure ever? Well, we could debate it. But here's the question. If he was it his failure or was he Jesus' failure? Throughout the study of the disciples, we've found that God can take average, ordinary men and do something magnificent with them. He turned ragamuffins into racehorses for his kingdom. That was the case with the first 11 that we looked at. But not so much with Judas. I don't think I have to issue a spoiler alert to tell you that Judas was the one who betrayed Jesus. Everyone knows that. And you probably even know that he did it for 30 pieces of silver, which, by the way, that is ironically the amount of compensation that an owner received if someone killed his slave in the Old Testament. So the priests who paid Judas obviously didn't think much of Jesus. We all know that. But here's what you might be surprised to learn. The disciples never, ever saw it coming. Judas occupied a position of trust in the group, and they really, really trusted him. Why do I say that? Well, first we know that Jesus appointed him as keeper of the purse. He watched over their ministry and doled out the ministry resources according to need. It stands to reason that Jesus gave him that job because he trusted him. And because Jesus trusted him implicitly, so did they. The disciples not only trusted him, they actually trusted his judgment. Judas was a leader who spoke for the group when addressing Jesus about matters of finance and charity. Do you remember that awkward scene that took place in Bethany when Jesus returned there for a dinner in his honor? This was Lazarus' hometown. It was after Lazarus had been raised from the dead, and everyone who was anyone in Bethany had gathered at the home of Simon the leper to celebrate the miracle. It was such a big deal that the event is recorded in all 4 Gospels. Now, what happened was while they were reclining at the table, Mary came and anointed Jesus with some very expensive perfume. It essentially amounted to her life savings. She emptied her retirement account on Jesus. Now, Matthew tells us that the disciples, all of them, were indignant about the waste of money. But John informs us that it was Judas who stepped up to speak for the group, saying that it would have been better for Mary to sell the perfume and give the money to the poor than to waste it by pouring it all over Jesus. This is a bold play, but the point is made. In these matters, Judas spoke for the disciples. Why? Because they trusted him and they trusted his judgment. As a matter of fact, they trusted Judas so much that they never even suspected that he would betray Jesus, even after Jesus told them he would. Do you remember how the scene played out in the upper room? I'm going to read from John chapter 13. After he had said this, Jesus was troubled in spirit and testified, I tell you the truth, one of you is going to betray me. His disciples stared at one another, at a loss to know which of them he meant. One of them, the disciple whom Jesus loved, was reclining next to him. Simon Peter motioned to that disciple and said, Hey, ask him which one he means. Leaning back against Jesus, he asked him, Lord, who is it? Jesus answered, It's the one to whom I will give this piece of bread when I've dipped it in the dish. Then, dipping the piece of bread, he gave it to Judas Iscariot, son of Simon. As soon as Judas took the bread, Satan entered him. What you're about to do, do quickly, Jesus told him. And now listen to this, verse 28. But no one at the meal understood why Jesus said this to him. Since Judas had charge of the money, some thought Jesus was telling them to buy what was needed for the feast or to give something to the poor. As soon as Judas had taken the bread, he went out, and it was night. So Jesus told John, who therefore told Peter, watch this, the person that I'm about to share this bread with is the one who's going to betray me. And guess what? No one believed him. Why? They couldn't. It was Judas. They thought Judas was going out for donuts to wrap up the meal. He was a dependable, trustworthy person. He was keeper of the money. He would never betray Jesus or the group. But he did both. What happened? His passion for money, which could have been harnessed for good causes, it's clearly what Jesus had in mind, his passion for money had soured to greed. And in the end, he sold Jesus out. Now, was he the most colossal failure in all of human history? I don't know. We can debate that. But what I do know is that he betrayed his master and the team that trusted him. So what do we learn from the cautionary tale of Judas? Well, we have a tendency to trust men blindly, at times even elevating them to a place in our hearts that should only be reserved for God. People will fail us, but God never will, because he's the best ever. That's a truth worth believing, and this is truth worth living. Thank you so much for joining me today. My prayer for you is that God will bless you and keep you and cause his face to shine upon you and give you peace. Have a great afternoon.